What is Satan? Most of us who have actually been haven't have or have had experience with the denominational Christian world, many who have left that world they have actually come to the realization that the definition of Satan that the Christian denominations of the Western world are using is not real. It is mistaken, it is misguided. But that does not mean that Satan does not exist. And in this case, ignorance is not bliss. In this particular video, what we're going to do is speak along the lines of what is the Westernized interpretation of Satan and what's the ancient Israelite perspective of Satan. And is Satan something that you need to be aware of within the new covenant? Stay tuned. Boom! Blessings and much love and shout out to everybody joining us on our social media platforms. We are streaming live on our YouTube channel, which is Ancient Biblical Spirituality, on our Facebook channel or Facebook page, which is Zane Pay, Ancient Biblical Pneumatologist, and I'm also streaming live on Twitter. If you are actually now joining us in the comment section, whether you're on Facebook, you're on YouTube, or you're on Twitter, please feel free to comment in the comment section. Let us know who you are, what your name is, where you're coming from, and let's get this rolling. All right, so I haven't actually done lives for a little while. Shout out to Holy Sister Joyce Jellison joining us in the comment section. Shout out. Aloha, great to be here. Holy Sister Vanna is in the house. Blessings and much love. Holy Sister Jean Cobb is in the house. Blessings and much love. Awesome to see you all. So as I was saying, I've not done lives for a little while. I actually took a sabbatical on the lives that I used to do before. And in that sabbatical, I pretty much gave some more attention to the Patreon community, creating content, generating content, we've started reaction videos, as well as starting the new podcast, the new Biblical Perspective podcast season, which is Bible stories, right? Which is where we hone in on every Bible story in the Bible. We've started on Genesis. I think we've done two episodes so far. And of course, our sessions, our weekly sessions in particular, that I invite everybody to come to, if you're actually interested in practical application of spiritual dynamics that work, where you can see these things actually functioning right before your eyes. You can actually join us on Tuesday and Wednesday for our respective sessions. This month, July, I decided to step back up on the platform, step back up on the platform, step back up on the stage, and start doing some lives again. And the lives in particular have been pretty much doing some reconnaissance work, on what is going on amongst the body of Christ and what is the information that they really need. And right now, specifically amongst the body of Christ, especially for those who have actually left the denominational circles, one of the things I'm actually realizing is when most people leave the denominational circles, they tend to function with a pendulum swing, which is whatever they were interfacing with, they are not aware of the fact that whatever they were interfacing with is the definition that somebody else has actually given that particular thing. They leave that circle and they swing way across on the next side. And when they swing across on the other side, then we begin to see the idea or the assumption that what they were experiencing was 100% evil. They swing across to the other side, to the other extreme. And in doing so, they put themselves at great disadvantage, because there's nothing that is inherently evil under the sun. And therefore, it is not that anything is evil. The question is, what is the definition that you've been using that worked against you? And so, one of the things I'm seeing very prominently on social media and amongst believers in Christ is the idea, since you've left legalism, you left the legalistic perspective of the church, you've left the whole concentration and emphasis and glorification and awareness of Satan. You may have left the denominational circles and you're swung to the other side of the spectrum, where you're trying to you may be trying to invalidate Satan, and then people go and then many go as far as trying to treat Satan as though it does not exist. And coming from someone with well over 50,000 hours of experimental research into spiritual dynamics and also understanding the ancient interpretation of the text through the name and the garden, ignorance is not bliss when it comes to this topic. What you may have been taught in the Western Christian community may be misguided, but to try to think that Satan does not exist, the only thing it's going to do is work against you, because that is the same thing as actually knowing, or is the same thing as actually trying to convince yourself that evil in the world doesn't exist. And then when the evil is happening to you, you have no template, you have no idea as to how to manage what is going on, and then you become subject to the evil and to the fullest extent of that evil. Does that make sense, everybody? If that makes sense, type sense in the comment section. Shout out to Holy Sister Sybil Kavanagh, joining us in the comment section as well on YouTube. Blessings and much love. If you know anyone that you think may benefit from this content, please feel free to share it. Please feel free to be active in our comment section. And even though you are here speaking with me, greet others in particular in the comment section. This is our community. Get to know each other. You might just have your next best friend, like-minded believer, commenting right next door to you in the comment section. Yeah? Now, Don O joining from London. Blessings and much love. Blessings and much love. Now, this in particular, this topic specifically, is a topic that could be something that could be feel as though you are triggering or you feel triggered by this. And this is because, shout out to also Saad Johnson from Liberia. Blessings and much love. Blessings and much love. So, as I said just now, this topic is a topic that might be triggering for some persons who have actually left denominational Christianity. And that is understandable. And it is very understandable because the context of Satan in the Western Christian community has actually been given a definition or a frame that does not belong to biblical literature. And that frame in particular is based on a concept that the Bible actually communicates or highlights and gives you a choice of whether you actually want to consider that particular concept. Now, for those of you who have never really questioned where the idea of Satan being the enemy of God and having an army, ranks, devils, fallen angels that are actually working with him and fighting against God and trying to take control of others, this invisible entity running around doing people's stuff. If you have been taught that perspective and you're left, you know something is wrong with it, but you've not been able to put your finger on it, tonight I actually can very, very clearly communicate to you that that perspective did not originate with Moses. It didn't originate in the garden. It didn't originate with Moses. The prophets did not know it. The priests were not aware of it. It's actually a perspective that came into the ancient Israelite perspective after King Solomon, where Israel actually became enslaved to other nations, namely Babylon and then Persia. And during that time frame that they were involved or they were subject to that captivity, obviously when King Nebuchadnezzar marched the Israelites back from Jerusalem after destroying the city, marched them back to the city of Babylon, obviously he did not stop being the oppressor here. He didn't stop and say, hey guys, did you remember to take the Torah? Don't forget to take the Torah because that is important. Right? That would make sense, right? So all were marched back to Babylon. Just a short history lesson here. They were marched back to Babylon and they were enslaved in Babylon. And during the enslavement, King Cyrus, who is also called God's anointed king, was anointed in the literature of the prophets. He is actually the next king that came in and took over Babylon. And because the Israelites were already captive in Babylon, Cyrus became the new king. Now there's a difference between King Nebuchadnezzar, Babylonian king, and King Cyrus, Persian king. And the big difference was the military strategy. Whereas Babylon functioned from the perspective of coming against your nation, destroying the place, and marching those that they take captive back to their land and installing them in the land. And in most cases, installing them there in a form of slavery. Cyrus, king of Persia, worked with a military strategy that earned him the name King of Kings. Now, many believers, many Christians in the modern Christian world, when they hear the term King of Kings, they feel this guy is trying to take glory from Jesus. But if that is what you may have been taught, or that is the perspective that you may have held, you may have been heavily misguided. King Cyrus was in fact King of Kings, and that's because he functioned with a military strategy that actually did not follow that of Babylon. And what he did is that before he actually does anything, when he arrived at the borders of your nation, he would actually seek from the leaders via a messenger. You saw this in the movie 300 as an example. He actually gave them the option of whether they wanted to go to war or not. If you went to war, you fight the Persian army. If you didn't want to go to war, you sent a token pretty much acknowledging him as the new owner of the territory. But in his case, he did not touch your country. He did not touch the governmental structure, nor how the country is running. You were left, the leaders were left in their position, and their nation now acknowledged Persia or the Persian king as their king. So he became a king of many kings. Now, within these nations, one of the things in particular that Israel was pretty much in contact with was the mythologies, the laws, and the folklores of these nations. And for the Jewish leaders who were there with them in an attempt to maintain control of the Israelites, who were very fascinated with these mythologies and folklores and all of these ancient religious mythological perspectives, what the Israelite leaders did was listen up, they incorporated the mythologies, the laws and the folklores into Israelite tradition, and they gave it a Yahweh perspective, a Yahweh twist. And so for the very first time, you heard about Satan being a rival of God was when Israel pretty much arrived in Persia, because of mythologies that actually showed it came from a perspective in their folklores that taught that every man has good thoughts and evil thoughts, and the good thoughts come from a good God, evil thoughts come from an evil God. And over the course of time, the good God was given the name Yahweh, and Satan, and the evil God was given the name Satan. How many of us hearing this for the first time? right? Respond in the comment section. Shout out to Holy Sister Courtney King. Blessings and much love. And Holy Sister Monica Poyton is joining us in the comment section. And of course, by extension, Holy Brother Norman Pigeon. Blessings and much love. Blessings and much love. Now, if you're hearing this for the first time, I encourage you to just take your time, digest it, swallow, take a breath, sip your coffee or your wine or whatever your beverage of choice is so we can move on. Right. Now, which means that the whole idea of Satan being a god, the god of this world, is actually outside of biblical literature. It was incorporated in the captivity of Israel. It actually continued, and eventually the Western world came into contact with the biblical literature and used these already known perspectives and actually compounded it, added to it, and that's how we have had this whole battle between God and Satan for all this time. Now, having said that, it is very important that we do not be carried away by the perspectives of these uncircumcised persons, because Israel was a circumcised nation in captive by the uncircumcised. Now, what therefore is the circumcised and the uncircumcised, and why does it exist? To understand why the circumcised and uncircumcised exist, we need to go back to the book of Genesis. In the book of Genesis, we see that God, the ancient priests, prophets, and apostles, whilst we were taught that God created heaven and earth, created man on the sixth day, in the 7 days of creation, we were taught that he was created on the sixth day, then there was a seventh day. And then after the seventh day, we tend to just browse very quickly through chapter 2 because it doesn't really make much sense to us. And then we go straight to the serpent and the action start. We've been taught a perspective of the serpent that treats the serpent as a mercenary that came into the garden and took down the garden successfully. All of these things have nothing to do with the actual interpretation of the text. So if you have never heard this before, I encourage you to follow our channel, what I'm about to say here, so you can get more information. And feel free to actually get involved in our new platform on nas.io, which is Anointed Life Mentorship International, where you can join there and pay $1 for your first month, $5 per month after, and you can ask all of your questions there, and we will be happy to respond to you. The garden narrative through the lens of the ancients is very different from what we have been taught. Whilst we were taught that God created the earth in 7 days, physical creation, and then we speed past chapter 2, jump into chapter 3, and we come to all of these magnanimous and fantastic conclusions. The ancients actually taught, according to the text itself, that Genesis chapter 1 to chapter 2 verse 3 was never a physical creation. It was actually in the spiritual realm. If you don't believe me, go read chapter 2 from verse 4 to verse 6, and it actually clearly communicates to you that everything that was mentioned in the history of the creation of heaven and earth was created before it was in the earth, which means it took place in the mind and vision of God. And Moses, being a prophet who functions from visions, he structured it through the function of a prophet, identifying vision, and then that vision is breathed into the man as the breath of life, and then the man becomes the creator of heaven and earth. This is why Yeshua, who identifies as the first and the last, the first Adam and the last, is actually shown as the creator of heaven and earth. Without him wasn't anything made that was made. Right? Because he's identifying as the first one in the garden. Now, in doing this, the text in particular, not trying to get into any much details, but the text in particular makes a differentiation in system of thinking, mindset, or system of logic. There is a logic of thought, a way of thinking, a system of intelligence that is actually taking place inside of the garden. And then there was a change of the system of intelligence that actually caused and gave birth to outside of the garden, which is desert. So when God created a man in the garden and he breathed the breath of life into him, he breathed the whole garden that was framed, according to the writer of Hebrews chapter 11, framed in the spiritual realm, framed in this vision. He was breathed into the man. And then the man was given the name Yahweh Elohim. The breath to the ancients is the name. The breath is the spirit. The breath is the name. The breath is the character. And the title Yahweh actually means to be self-existent and eternal. Self-existent meaning that you function from your own spirit. And then a conversation with the serpent began, and man changed from using God, his own spirit, which is God in him, as his reference point for his wisdom, and started to use the serpent. And since the serpent was the preacher of the tree, he used the serpent and took on the mindset of the serpent, which is actually using the tree to give himself, to compare himself to, and he began to dress himself up like a tree, taking on the identity of the tree. This gave birth to a perspective where one no longer uses, or he no longer used his own spirit for wisdom. He began to compare himself to external things. And this, in this case, a tree, to use that as a source of wisdom. Now, whilst in the Western world, you are taught that Satan is a fallen angel that has other fallen angels under his command and his at his disposal, like high-ranking army officials. And he has demons on the earth that are in rank, and he is the commander of this force to reckon with. Most of us, because of that perspective, were taught at this point of the narrative that Satan was a fallen angel that came into the garden and took down man because of jealousy. One of the things in particular that biblical literature does not allow you to do because of the title of the literature, it's called the Law of the Lord, which is the translation of the principle of Yahweh, or the Torah of Yahweh. The Torah of Yahweh is actually a translation of the principle of the self-existent. The title of the text defines how the text is supposed to be approached. And that means that the text is self-existent. Self-existent meaning it is forbidden to use any external information or external reference points to give definition to the concepts within the text. And therefore, the text in itself provides definitions of the concepts where the concepts are first mentioned. Huge shout out to Holy Sister Patty Sutton joining us in the comment section. Just taking a moment to shout out our holy priest and master mentor, Patty Sutton. So everybody following so far? Type follow. Type follow. Right? We just want to make sure nobody's lost. Everybody is following. Your mind is still fresh, not saturated. And of course, if you want more information, again, you know what to do. Join us on our NAS.io platform. All right. We see we are following. Right? Now, right here is where we actually need to begin to separate. Because whereas the Western Christian community took a story and input it into the text, not knowing that you were violating the text by taking something outside of the text and imposing it into the text, ancient priests, prophets, and apostles understood that the text was self-existent, and therefore it must be interpreted by itself. The context, the text, wherever the concepts are mentioned first, gives definition for the text. In the context of the text, through the lens of the ancient priests, the serpent was not a fallen angel. The serpent was a helper created in chapter 2. It clearly says that in chapter 3, that Yahweh Elohim, man, gave life. He breathed the breath of life into this text, into this animal. The animals were the first level of helpers that was given to the man in the garden when God said it is not good for man to be alone. The response after that was to create animals. Then the man saw that amongst the helpers there was not one that was suitable for him. And then, and only then, was the helpmeet, the multiplication of the spirit of the man. 2 men, one with womb and one without, were created with the respective genitalia, right? So that they could reproduce after their own kind. The serpent was actually created as a helper in chapter 2. And therefore, as a helper, he was not a mercenary. What he was doing was functioning how he was created to function. What is the difference between the man and the helper? The man is called Yahweh, meaning that he is a self-existent generator of thought. He actually takes action upon the thoughts that is based on the vision that is given to his spirit as his nature. So he's actually taking action on thoughts based on the nature of his own spirit, without influence from external factors. So he is like the sun shining in the sky. In the same way, the sun shines in the sky, it generates its own energy. It is not influenced by external factors. Whether it's raining, whether there is snow, the sun continues to shine because it is actually functioning from its own nature. So the man in the garden was like the sun. The helper in the garden is like the moon. The helper is the helper of thoughts, the helper of word. Right? In the beginning was the word. The word was the man that was made flesh. The word was breathed into the man and it became flesh. And the helper is the helper of the word. And the word would be thoughts and visions. So the helper is pretty much receiving the thoughts from the Yahweh man, and he begins to take action on the thought. That means, whereas most believers are taught that the serpent came into the garden as a fallen creature, like a mercenary, according to the text, the helper acted upon a thought that the Adam was having, and acted upon the thoughts, and began and gained knowledge of the tree. In ancient culture, knowledge is not something that you learn or memorize. Knowledge is something that you experience, which means by the order of the text, the serpent had to have partaken of the tree to become a preacher of the tree. And then the man, shout out to Ali D joining us in the comment section as well. Blessings and much love. And then the man did something that caused the serpent to be called Satan for the first time in all of the scriptures, which is just after Genesis chapter 1 and 2. In Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2, especially in chapter 2, it was actually, especially in chapter 1 and 2, the serpent was said to be good and very good. When the serpent ate from the tree, did the man fall out of the garden when the serpent ate from the tree? Yes or no? Or did the fall take place when the man actually used the serpent as his new source of wisdom? Did the man fall out? Did they fall out of the garden? Did the Adam fall out of the garden when the serpent spoke about the tree? No, he did not. Did he fall out of the garden when the female Adam ate from the tree? Respond in the comment section. Let's hear your perspective. No, they did not. Therefore, the serpent speaking about the tree was not a problem. It was actually doing what it was designed to do, to help. What became the problem is when the man listened to the serpent as his new source of wisdom instead of the Spirit of God in him, the Yahweh Spirit in him. He was no longer listening to the vision that Yahweh put in him as his nature. He began to listen to the serpent. And do you know that that is the first time the Bible actually identifies, or the scriptures identify, that the serpent is called Satan? It was not Satan before that moment. It was good and very good. Now, right there begins a departure from what all of Western Christianity has been taught. Whilst Westernist Christianity taught that was a fallen angel that came into the garden and caused them and took down the garden and took the garden from the Adam, which is an imposition of thoughts outside of the text, because that is nowhere to be found in the text. In no priest, no prophet, and neither did any apostle teach you that. The text in particular is said to be the Torah of Yahweh, which is the principle of the self-existent that defines, that the text in itself defines all of its concepts. And you can find that at the first mention of every single concept. Therefore, through the rest of the text, we know that the serpent was called Satan only when the man used it as his source of wisdom. Is everybody following? Type follow. Now, this is super significant in the narrative. And this is where we need to really become clear as to what Satan is and what exactly are you interfacing with. And right here, in particular, is where most believers have been taught that when you leave the Western Christian community, that Satan is not real. And as I said, ignorance is not bliss when it comes to this topic. Because if you see evil and you begin to treat the evil like it doesn't exist, you will have no response for its domination. And that does not mean that it is your dominator, but your lack of knowledge make you the ideal target for the evil to dominate. Because you cannot manage what you do not understand. Let me say that again. You cannot manage what you do not understand. And even though the whole Western idea of Satan is misguided, the title Satan exists in the Bible with a definition. And if you are not aware of that definition, you are yourself are going to be open to be dominated by something that you are not seeing. It is like trying to tell yourself that a boxer does not exist. And when the boxer starts to box and starts to punch you in your face because you convince yourself that it does not exist, you are receiving blows and you don't know how to stop it because you chose to invalidate something that God named. And so it is better to actually understand what is the name defined that as, instead of treating it as though it is not to be seen as something that exists. If it is one thing in particular that I can actually state at this point, is that one does not understand light until you can define darkness. If you cannot define darkness, then you do not understand light. And what will take place is that you will drift into darkness. And once, because it has not been defined and identified, When you drift into the darkness, you will also call it light at your own demise. Is this making sense to everybody? Again, I'm doing this live to identify what Satan is, because many believers I'm seeing all around, especially on social media, that are actually trying to invalidate the concept, and you are being beaten by the same thing that you're trying to convince yourself that it does not exist, and therefore you have zero authority over it, because you're trying to tell yourself that is not necessary. There is a reason why Psalm 1 says that the one who delights himself in the law of Yahweh, which is the principle of the self-existent, meditates on the law or the principle, not the rules, the principle, day and night. Day and night is actually a double entendre in scripture, for those of you who do not know. Yes, in its simple meaning, it means day, as in time of day, and night, as in the other time of day. But day and night is also the titles given to light and darkness in Genesis chapter 1, which means it refers to consistently, as in time of day, but it also means that you're supposed to meditate both light and darkness. Because if you don't meditate on what both are, you do not have what the Bible calls understanding. Understanding in scriptures, to find understanding in scriptures through the lens of the ancient priests, is to not only look at what is in front of you, but to contrast it and to invert it. If you haven't inverted it, you do not understand it. If you have not contrasted it against what has been given to you to contrast it with, very strategically, and if you have not inverted what you're looking at, light, and invert to see what is the darkness of that, or to look at the darkness and invert to see what the light of it is, you do not have understanding. And you are going to make very, very grave mistakes. And the only person that will suffer is you. I'm saying that with modestly 50,000 hours of practical experience with spiritual dynamics from the scriptures. This is not theory. Just so that you know. You can take this as I explain it here and go check your scripture to see that it is there. But more importantly, put it into practical function. And you will see, and you will come back and tell me that what I am saying is not a lie. Back on target. So you're looking at the serpent, which in chapter 2 was called a helper. And the helper means that he is helping the thought of the Adam, of the Yahweh Adam. He's helping the thought. Now, for those of you who probably hearing for the first time that the Adam was called Yahweh, that is actually written in chapter 2. Unfortunately, you may not understand how to read the text according to the logic of the ancient Hebrews to see it. Because you are taught to read in Western culture through what we call step logic, meaning that you read everything in chronological order, and your scriptures are written in block logic. That is not to be explained here tonight. However, it is important to understand that this is also in the Bible. You can find it in Isaiah chapter 43, where it says that the one who God made, he gave his name, Yahweh. So the text is actually communicates that the man in the garden was called Yahweh. When he changed his source of wisdom to another creature that he could see with his eyes, with his senses, externally, he was then given the title dust. Outside of the garden was the first time God said, dust you are, and to dust you shall return. Did God give him that title? No. He gave himself that title by using something of the dust as a source of wisdom, took on the mindset of that entity, and began to function, listen up, began to function as a seed of the serpent, meaning man became serpent in species. Seed of the serpent means seed of the species. Now, for the first time in the text, is the serpent actually called Satan? Why? The title Satan, it is a title, but make no mistake, every title is the name of a spirit in the garden. It is not a random title that you take on. The title is the name of a spirit, and that spirit has a function. If it wasn't a person, Jesus would not have had to crucify that on the cross. To take on the title and the spirit by faith and crucify it on the cross, it was that real that he could be crucified. Let that sink into your mind. So mankind became the species of the serpent. The title, the word Satan, actually communicates adversary, or it is also used to refer to anything that is not functioning in the way that God designed it to function. The serpent was made in chapter 2 and was functioning how God designed it to function. The only thing that changed was that man began to use the serpent outside of his intended function. And by using the serpent as his new Elohim, which is the source of his thoughts and wisdom, the serpent was given the title Satan. Meaning, it is not a Satan to the creation. It is now being abused by the man. Abused means that you're using it contrary to what it was designed to do. And therefore, it is the Satan to man. So your next question is, how on earth then did the same deceiver actually come to Jesus and says, bow down to me and I will give you all of this? The order of authority in the garden is God creates sun, the sun creates heaven and earth. If the sun changes his source of wisdom, changes his Elohim, then the Elohim of the sun is now the serpent. The Elohim, what is your Elohim? Please pay attention to what I'm about to say here. Whatever your Elohim is, you are receiving thoughts from. Those thoughts are not things. In the context of the garden narrative, thoughts are the multiplication of a spirit, just like fruit is the multiplication of a tree. Just like the leaves on the tree is being multiplied from the tree, so thoughts are a multiplication of a spirit. So if the serpent becomes the Elohim of the man, he is taking thoughts from the serpent, he has then filled himself with the spirit of the serpent. And if he was given lordship over heaven and earth, then the serpent multiplying himself in the man, and the man becoming a species of serpent, placed the species of serpent as Lord over heaven and earth. Is this making sense? So now Satan has control over the man. And then Paul says that death reigned freely from Adam to Moses, meaning death was reigning over man. No longer life reigning over him. From the title Yahweh, he's using something outside of its context. And that was not designed to be his source of life. His own spirit was. And there began what the Bible actually calls sin, or Moses calls sin, which is not functioning from your own spirit, but using external creation as your source of wisdom. And therefore, the serpent is called Satan. And when the serpent was given the title Satan, man became Satan in flesh. And so the species became Satan. If you're following this, type follow. The species became Satan, which is also called death. Now, in the context of the scriptures, if life comes from your spirit and you change the source of wisdom, you change your Elohim, which is you change your God, your source of information, your source of wisdom, your source of inspiration, you have just, man gave birth to death by doing that. So his spirit became the opposite of life, which is death. If you're following this, type follow. Respond, type follow in the comment section. Now, this actually means that Satan is an actual spirit. A spirit that was in man that Yeshua had to identify with, to put it on the cross and put it to death. And when he put it to death, 3 days and 3 nights later, he's resurrected with a new breath, meaning that that breath was expelled from the body as its nature. Because when the man made the decision to make the serpent his reference point, the vision of that serpent concerning the tree became his nature, and he went looking for external things to compare himself to. Just reliving the perspective of the first man, which is why Paul says that death reigned freely, and that death came into the earth through one man. One man sinned, and everybody, being a reproduction after his own kind, was reproduction of death in our body. No longer life in our body, but death in our body. Nice. Now, having said that, we now must understand something that is very important. We therefore must understand that Satan, you cannot manage what you cannot understand. Right. Who is Sister Sybil saying no? Is that in response to something that I'm saying, or is a conversation going on in the comment section? Now, in this case, therefore, Satan, pay attention, because this is where it gets personally applicable to you. When Yeshua put this to the cross and breathed it out of the body, removing it as its nature, and then 3 days and 3 nights later was resurrected with the spirit of Elohim, it was like the breath of life being rebreathed into man. And since he identifies as the first, as Paul was actually communicating in the book of Romans, just as the first man was called Adam, Yahweh Adam, and then changed his Elohim and became a seed of the serpent and became death in a body. Now Yeshua, who identifies as the first, 3 days and 3 nights later, well, many persons in particular have been taught that Jesus died on the cross based on penal substitution. That is only Western perspectives of the Bible that came from people who did not understand how to interpret the Bible. And I will just hold on to that thought, and I will actually give you context as to why penal substitution, the Bible itself will show you that penal substitution is foolishness. It's misguided understanding of the Bible. When Yeshua, by faith, put on the nature of that spirit, the title and nature of that spirit, you notice that he put on death and he began to experience everything that comes with death, which is whipping, condemnation, and an actual giving up his life as well. In the context of the garden, when the Adam made this decision, we go into chapter 4. And in chapter 4, we see the story of Cain and Abel. Now, in the Western culture, you understand the simple meaning of the text, which is only the first out of 4 levels of interpretation of biblical literature. And the first level is the simple meaning. What is the simple meaning? The simple meaning is simply what took place according to the narrative as an event. We saw that Cain and Abel, they presented sacrifices before God. God actually respected Abel's sacrifice. He didn't show respect to Cain's sacrifice shortly after Cain kills Abel, and then he departs Eden. In summary, the second level of interpretation is actually, what does that text mean? Firstly, by watching the titles of those texts, or the titles of those names, and what the titles in the text mean. And you can see that Cain, his name means to acquire. And therefore, Cain presents his sacrifice before God, trying to acquire God's respect. In the previous chapter, God said that God told his father that from the sweat of his brow, he will eat bread and he will cultivate the ground. Paraphrasing, of course, Cain, being the seed of his father, actually brought the fruit of the ground to God. And so in the text, it is to be understood that what Cain was bringing was his sweat, because God said, through the sweat of your brow. So bringing up the fruit of the ground is bringing your sweat. And so what Cain was actually trying to show Yahweh was, look at my sweat to actually do this outside of your spirit, which means Cain embraced the serpent identity and was trying to show what the serpent identity could do with sweat. Because Yahweh breathed the breath of life into the dust in the garden, Yahweh began a species of Yahweh. And therefore, just like lions speak with lions, dogs communicate with dogs, Yahweh communicate with Yahweh. So Abel was respected because Abel's offering, his burnt offering, was an animal, which represented the animal nature that the man, that his father got from the serpent. And since he's the seed of his father, he puts the animal on an altar in faith, in representation of the animal nature that he got from his father, burns it in representation of the abandonment and the consumption of that identity. And then he calls upon the name, invoking the name of Yahweh to be his personal spirit. And because Abel was interfacing with God, Yahweh to Yahweh, by sacrificing the animal nature, allowing the animal nature to be consumed on the altar, God respected Abel because Abel was now interfacing with God, Yahweh to Yahweh. What is not taught in the Western culture is what I just told you there, and it goes further. The next step is those two boys and their perspectives represented 2 ways that one can live in response to what the Adam did. One is Cain's way, which is you do not function from Yahweh's name. You identify with the serpent spirit and every type that comes with that, and you pursue heaven by using dust to create your own heaven on the earth, which is what you see everybody is doing in the world. They're not in Yahweh's spirit, and they're pursuing money, career, social status, children, family, house, car. What they're doing is pursuing their validation by acquiring dust to validate their identity. Because The identity that the Cain mentality works with is the serpent identity that God did not give. So the Cain is in the pursuit of validating the identity that he creates that he got from the serpent, and he's trying to build on his own. Abel's response is to abandon the serpent nature and call upon the name and interface with Yahweh, Yahweh to Yahweh, and therefore reproduce heaven on the earth from the spirit on the earth. No sweat. Reproduce it after your own kind. These two perspectives are established in the text to present to the reader, which is every one of you if you read the Bible, that there are two ways within which you can read your text. Either you read your text from the law of acquisition, which is what you have been taught in all of Western culture. You need to do something to acquire, which is transactional. Or you read the text according to Abel, who was replaced by Seth, which is you identify with Christ and read the text through the lens of being in the name of the Lord Yeshua and reproducing Yahweh's word after your own kind. For those of you hearing this for the first time, for all of your life, before tonight, you have read your text through the law of transaction for acquisition, which means you have been in the posture and in the character of Cain all of your life, which is why you have not seen any results, only frustration, hurt, and disappointment. Because the law of the garden is reproduction after your own kind. Yeshua is of the seed of the lineage of Seth, who replaced Abel, which means if you have to understand the Bible through the lens of Jesus, you have to abandon this animal nature, call upon the name, and read the text through the principle of reproducing after your own kind. When you came into Christ, this is what you did. The cross represented the altar, and Yeshua represented the lamb, the animal nature on the cross on your behalf. And so, just as the serpent was lifted up in the wilderness, so the Son of Man would be lifted up on the cross. And just in the serpent, it was called a fiery serpent, meaning a serpent being consumed by the knowledge of good and evil, which means Yeshua on the cross represented the serpent being consumed by the knowledge of good and evil on the altar, which means that cross was your burnt offering, consuming the spirit of death, the wisdom of death, the nature of death, the will of death, and death in your body. And in response to that sacrifice, you are supposed to recognize that death is no longer part of you, and you put on the opposite, which is life. Which is why mind renewal is important here. And your mind renewal is to learn to live from reproducing after your own kind and cease and desist acquisition by means of transaction. How many of us hearing this for the first time ever? First time you're hearing this. This has led the whole Western Christian community to actually run an entire denominational movement in Cain, not in Abel, which is by extension in Christ. If you're hearing this for the first time, type first time in the comment section. Now, this here now basically means that if you've been reading the text through Cain, through the perspective of acquisition, then you've been reading it through death, which is the pursuit of life outside of you by acquiring things. to give you a sense of fulfillment, a sense of respect, a sense of personal validation. You've been reading the Bible for all of your life through death. Now let's come back to the cross. When Yeshua identified with that spirit, he put it on the cross, meaning the identity that man got from the tree, he nailed it back to the tree and breathed the breath back out of the body. 3 days and 3 nights later, he resurrects. Death was given. Now, you have to understand, if you have been thinking about penal substitution, you have been reading the Bible through Cain, which is acquisition by transaction. Yeshua is of the lineage of Seth and Abel, which means he lives by reproducing it after his kind. That means that the suffering of Yeshua was Yeshua on the behalf of humanity, taking on the name and the title of death and allowing death to reproduce after its own kind on him to its fullest extent, with all of its might, allowing it to reproduce after its kind through him, and then giving up his life to show it that you no longer have authority, nor do you reign over humanity anymore. I resurrected after I allowed you to fully exhaust yourself on me on behalf of humanity, which is on behalf of the man in the garden. And now I resurrect, and now I rule over you. Life now rules over everything again. Death is no longer ruling over humanity. Which is why in Revelation you see that he has resurrected. Behold, I am alive forevermore, and I have the keys to death and the grave. Which means life rules. If you identify with Yeshua, and if you identify with Yeshua, you have the keys over death and the grave. And that means you have the keys over Satan. Because Satan in particular is outside, is when man started to use the serpent as a reference point. Now, if you're hearing this for the first time, it is understandable that it could be a huge moment of cognitive dissonance. Very understandable, because you have learned the Bible through Constantine. You have not learned the Bible through the ancient priesthood. And the ancient priesthood took on the name and the cognitive law of that name, meaning a self-existent mindset, and spoke the scriptures and taught the scriptures. So for most of you who have been educated in the Western world, this right here is cognitive dissonance, and that is understandable. But what proves that your perspective of the scriptures is Constantine is that you are sick and that you are dying and you're suffering mental health issues, which means you are reproducing death after your own kind. You're reproducing death after your own kind because you are pursuing life by transaction. You were taught that you need to keep these rules and fulfill these actions to get life and to get to heaven. You were not taught that life is something that you take on as a name, as a title, and as a spirit, and you begin to reproduce that after your own kind. That's why nobody in the Western Christian community can reproduce power, because you are treating it as something that you acquire instead of something that has been given to you. You're trying to pursue life. And this is why the gospel message is Christ in you. If you invert that, your problem is that you are seeing life outside of you. The gospel message tells you, if you invert the gospel message, it tells you what the problem was when the man made the decision. he was pursuing life outside of him. And the gospel message is stop pursuing the life outside of you. Now the life is inside of you. And now you have to learn to live, to reproduce that after your own kind. That means take on the name, take on the mindset of the name, the definition of that name, and give life, being life. You give life by being life. That right there is a whole different topic. Now, the culmination of this life here is this. The culmination of this life here is this. Satan, therefore, who is actually the title Satan that was given to the serpent because of man's use of the serpent, outside of its function, it was supposed to be a helper. Instead of a helper, he's using it as his source. Because of that, it's called Satan. And once he fills himself with that, he fills himself with Satan, which means Satan is a spirit, like everything else, that is reproducing death. When Jesus put it on the cross and exhaled it from the body, he displaced it from the body as the nature of the body, as well as his vision of external validation. 3 days and 3 nights later, he resurrects, and now he resurrects as the ruler over death, the ruler over Satan, which means if you don't understand that if most of us here, if you begin to live life by external reference points, you are making things around you your Satan. And just as the man at the beginning decided to reproduce death after his own kind, if you adopt the function of a spirit in the scriptures, you take on the energy and the title of that spirit, and it is going to reproduce in your body after its kind, which is where sickness, mental health issues come from, and death come from. That means that you have put on that nature by doing the same thing that the man did in the beginning, using external things for self-validation, for respect, and for a sense of inspiration and life, sense of fulfillment. You're pursuing it. And our society is filled with these things. You could use money, possessions, social status, academic accomplishment, having a huge career. You're pursuing these things not because Yahweh reproduces this. No, you are pursuing it to get respect from others. You are pursuing it to be validated by others. And from that pursuit, whenever that pursuit is affected negatively, mental health issues are born that eventually leads to sickness and death. This is the whole context of the Bible, which means Satan is a spirit and you can put it on. This is why you can go in 1 John and he speaks about the children of God and the children of the devil. Not because, they became the children of the devil because they willfully knew what it means to live from life, and they were oppressing others for self-benefit. If you're oppressing somebody for self-benefit, it's because you are trying to get life, and those who are stopping you, you are mashing them, crushing them to get it. And so they are called the children of the devil, which means you are putting on spirit by whether you are functioning from the vision of the Spirit in you, which is Yahweh, Christ Yeshua, Christ in you, or you're putting on a different spirit if you're allowing things outside of you and other people to validate you. Whichever you put on begins to reproduce after its kind. Which means you need to begin to, as anybody, we need to sit down and think, where am I getting my thoughts from? This has nothing to do with thou shalt not. That is dead since the cross. The question is, What is motivating me? What Yahweh says inside of me, the promises of God, or my desire to be validated by others, by the pursuit of things, or the opinions of others? My conclusion is this: just because the westernized perspective of Satan is wrong, it does not mean that Satan does not exist. And if you fool yourself into believing that it does not exist, you are not defining light and darkness. And you will step in to the nature of that particular title, which is a spirit, and you will clothe yourself with it. And it will reproduce on your mind, your heart, your soul, your mind, and your body. Is this making sense? Is everybody following that? And therefore, people who actually commit themselves to that willfully, or sometimes in a space where they are, let's say, willfully, and even in unknowingly, and it begins to reproduce after its kind, that is not, there is no void in the spiritual realm. Which means that if it is reproducing after its kind, meaning it's come on and it's seeing it's showing up on your body and it's evolving, it's actually growing in its expression, because most of us wanted to believe that Satan does not exist. That is prospering on you when you have the authority, the keys to tell it, leave in the name of Yeshua. Is this making sense, everybody? So I'm seeing some other comment section. I do want to but there's no so coming from all right, so I'm seeing some responses here from Wasim. Wasim, whatever you're experiencing, again, is actually rooted in what the text is actually saying. And you, sir, could make the decision right now to identify with Christ in you. Identify yourself with Christ in you. Stop, cease and desist, make a decision, vow to yourself from this very moment that you're no longer going to be using external sources of wisdom and external sources of validation. And you're not going to acknowledge that Christ is in you. And what I want you to do, sir, Wasim, right here as we are here, is to make that decision in your heart. And then you're going to call upon the name, meaning call Yahweh inside of you. The Lord Yeshua. Call him and feel him inside of you. And everything you're experiencing there, the life of that spirit is going to begin to reveal itself on your body. Everything you're experiencing there is going to start to shift. It is the nature of that spirit to reveal life. Which means the moment you do that, I want you to actually understand that by doing that, you have been justified before God. And life is going to flow out of you through grace. Grace can only be accessed by identifying with Yeshua. You access grace through Christ. If you don't identify with Christ, you can't really accept grace, because grace is the power of God that is placed in the Spirit of Christ as its nature. And what I am going to do for you As you do that, that I'm going to command all of that to leave, and it will cease and desist. So in the name of the Lord and Elohim Yeshua, every all darkness upon Wasim, you shall now bow your knees at the name of the Lord and Elohim Yeshua. You shall not operate in his heart, soul, mind, strength, nor body anymore. Bow your knees. I shall now command you to leave, and all things pertaining to you that is impacting him, I also call them the works of the enemy. Bow your knees at the name of the Lord and Elohim Yeshua. I shall now command you to leave, and you shall flee from him in terror, in fear, and in dread of the name of the Lord and Elohim Yeshua, and you shall not return. I hereby command you, leave. And now, Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh now make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. And Yahweh now lift up his countenance upon you and give you shalom. Arise and go take a walk. You are free. So that brings us to the end of this live here today. And I want to let everybody know that this is, even though it is not what the Western world has taught, there is no army. There is no demons running around the place. As a matter of fact, my next live tomorrow night, I'm going to explain what demons are, what devils are. And you may be surprised to know that what it is totally contrary to what you've been taught. And it's actually, well, let's leave that for tomorrow. Why is my camera not? Why is my camera doing that? Does everybody see me, blood? All right, there we go. All right. So, on that note, my conclusion here is what you've been taught may have been misguided, but there is a context to this, and you have authority over it. As a matter of fact, you should know that what is called Satan is actually a helper. And helpers are designed in a way where they cannot resist the thoughts of the one who is generating the thought. And so, since Yeshua has become the first of the species, that means that by default, all of the species are no longer called Adam, they're called Yeshua, which is why Yeshua is called the last Adam. And therefore, we are now in the position where you have to choose whether you are motivated by external things and repeat the experience of death, or live from the gospel message, Christ in you, which is living from the visions of that spirit, which is called the promises of God in the Bible. If you're motivated by that, you will reproduce life after your own kind, and your body will be healed. You are motivated by the promises, which are the visions of that spirit, and you will reproduce life after your own kind. There is no condemnation in the Bible. The question now in the New Covenant is what you're doing wise, or is it unwise? Let me hear that again. Is it wise or unwise? There is no right and wrong in the New Covenant. For those of you who have been taught that there is sin and all of this, no partner. What we call sin in the New Covenant is actually called missing the mark. And missing the mark is, are you functioning from the vision, which is the mark of the Spirit of Christ, or are you missing the mark by using something else as your source of wisdom and as your source of inspiration, as your source of respect? This is totally contrary to everything that you may have been taught. And that's because everything that you've been taught is through Cain, which is trying to acquire by transaction. You're trying to do something to get life when life is in you. And so all you need to do is to acknowledge it, acknowledge the visions that come from that spirit, and use it as your motivator for your actions. There is no death in you anymore. There is no sickness in your body. Which means if you identify that in your body is life, then take a rule over death, command it to leave, and you will see that your body will stop reproducing that and life will dominate again. So for those of you who are here and you have anything on your body, watch what happens here. Watch this. I am going to command all death and sickness to leave you, to flee from you. And it will flee from you, it will not return. And immediately, I will then bless you and command your body to be filled with the light of life as it comes upon you when I speak. And you will see exactly what I'm saying. You can rule over it. Rule over it. Even Yahweh told Cain, rule over it. You cannot rule over something that is not a spirit. And in the New Covenant, you are told the same. Rule over it, which means command the death as Jesus. Acknowledge that he is the spirit of your body, and as Jesus himself, in his name, rule over it and command the death to leave, command the sickness to leave, and establish in your mind and heart that from this moment you will walk in life and death cannot touch you anymore. So in the name of the Lord and Elohim Yeshua, and in the supremacy of the Lord and Elohim Yeshua, all death, I shall now command you to leave everyone looking at this now and those replay viewers. You shall flee from them in fear and in dread of the name of the Lord and Elohim Yeshua, and you shall not return to them. I hereby command you, death, and all of your expressions, live. And now be healed. Function properly from head to toe. Be made whole, and you shall now arise and take a walk and be made whole. Rule over it. Satan is to be ruled over. Rule over it. There is nothing that exists. There is no void in the spiritual realm. There's no void in the garden. And Yeshua has the keys to that. Rule over it. Is this making sense to everybody? Let's hear some comments in the comment section. Is this making sense to everybody? Tomorrow, we will take a look at 8:30 p.m. EST. Let's say 8:39, somewhere around there. EST. I will be live on what demons are. Nothing compared to what you were taught. That's not what it is. And then next week, we're going to take a look at why is it important to understand what Satan is. If you go through the Gospels, what you will see throughout all of the Gospels is that where healing is mentioned is always paralleled with a devil leaving. Because even sickness is a reproduction after the kind of something. So what you want to do is to cease looking for external life and understand the life is your very spirit and rule over it in the name of Yeshua. But we will speak about that next week. Once again, if you choose I'm leaving this with you. If you choose to treat darkness and evil as though it does not exist, you will never know when you are adopting the mindset and filling yourself with something that you don't want to be filled with. And you will not be able, in any form or fashion, to rule over what you cannot identify. What you cannot identify, what you cannot define, you cannot manage. You have to understand to be able to rule. Is this making sense, everybody? And that brings me to the end of our life today. I want to actually thank each and every one of you for taking the time to come onto this live. Wasim, go walk as Yeshua. Just pretend you're Yeshua and walk as Yeshua and see and imagine that life is flowing out of you. That light is your spirit. Go walk like him and see how all of that just fall off. And for those of you who are here, rule over him. Walk like him. And see life and health be established in your body. See how it begins to shift immediately. See how it shifts. Pay attention to the improvements, not what is still there. Don't pay attention to what Satan is reproducing. Pay attention to what the light of life, Yeshua, the Lord Yeshua, is reproducing. The Holy Ghost is reproducing, and you see health. All right, so shout out to everybody that joined me here today. Holy brother, I am assuming that Wasim is a holy brother. Holy sister Monica and holy brother Norman. Holy brother Chris, holy sister Jean. Holy sister Amy Castillo. Awesome to see you here tonight. Blessings and peace to you. Arise and be healed and be made whole. Holy sister Joyce. Holy sister Sybil. Holy sister Ali D. Holy sister Vanna. Blessings and much peace. Holy sister Pate. Blessings and much peace. Holy brother Don O. Blessings and much peace. Holy sister K. King. Blessings and much peace. Holy sister Sarah Johnson. Sarah Johnson. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correct. If I have not pronounced it correct, my humblest apologies. Blessings and much peace to each and every one of you. And if you know anybody who actually needs Wasim, go sleep. Go sleep. You will rest. Go sleep. You will rest. You will rest for 14 hours straight. If you know anybody in particular that will benefit from what we covered here tonight, please feel free to share it. It will change your life, change your experience, and it will change your health and even what's going on in your life. Reigning in life means that you have to reign over something. And the only thing that came in was actually man using creation outside of his intended purpose. Instead of giving it thoughts, he began to use it as a source of thoughts. People and things come back to functioning from the vision here, the promises of life here, and be motivated by that and start giving your body thoughts of life. Start giving the creation thoughts, and you will reign over Satan. Give him instructions, tell him where to go, and fill the creation with life. On that note, blessings, peace. See you tomorrow for Demonology 101 Part 2 on what are demons. Let's change this experience and come back to seeing that the gospel, it works. Remove all of the Western perspectives and it works. Boom. Yeshua.